Hello, I'm Ana Llinares, and together with my colleague Yuen and Susan Ballinger, we are co-editors of the Journal of Immersion and Content-Based Language Education. And today we have the pleasure to have with us Cory Mathieu and Diane Tedick. They are the authors of a paper that was recently published in our journal, and this paper received Fred Genesee Award as the best paper of that particular year. So we are happy to have Tedick and Cory Mathieu here. And the first question would be if you wouldn't mind summarizing your paper. The title of their paper is Using a Rubric as a Mediational Tool to Assess Pre-Service Immersion Teacher Development. Can you give us a brief summary of your paper?
Yes, thank you so much. And thanks again to you and the editorial board for honoring us with this award. We were really quite thrilled to receive it. As Anna mentioned, the title of the paper, essentially what we did, we had some grant funding through the U.S. Department of Education, and part of the project involved developing rubrics that could be used to assess teacher development. And we actually developed 3 separate rubrics. One rubric was for pre-service teachers that were in the process of being prepared to work in dual language and immersion classrooms, so bilingual classrooms essentially in the United States. And then we also had a different rubric for in-service teachers, already practicing teachers in these contexts, and then a self-assessment rubric that is more simplified in its format and is intended to work in tandem with the in-service rubric. It's for practicing teachers. And we were really quite interested in developing these tools because we didn't have, in the US anyway, we didn't have tools like this that were specific to bilingual contexts. And we felt that it would be important to articulate the kinds of strategies and behaviors and instructional practices that align with effective dual language and immersion teaching. So once these rubrics were developed, and it took quite some time to develop them, and we had a cycle of 3 years of piloting, feedback, and revision that we did with the pre-service program that we had at the university, which has been closed, by the way. Very sad, but things are not great in the US right now, I have to say. All sorts of things are closing down. At any rate, when we decided to do a study that would involve our pre-service program. We wanted to see whether the rubric would be helpful as a tool to support the development of a pre-service teacher and also the mentoring skills of a university supervisor. And so that's what we did. We did a case study, an in-depth case study with one pre-service teacher and one university supervisor. And we used sociocultural theory, some tenets of sociocultural theory as the theoretical framework to underlie the study. So.
Thank you. So I think you've already answered our first question, which was about your interest, why you became particularly interested in carrying out this study on rubrics. And you've explained the very, very carefully and clearly why. So maybe we go on to the second question, Yuen.
Actually, yes, Anna, could I add one other piece to that as well? Sorry to interrupt.
Sure, Cory. Yes. Yeah.
In terms of the why of using the rubrics, one challenge that happens here in the United States, at least, is that oftentimes administrators in dual language programs may not have dual language training themselves. And so when they're doing walkthroughs or evaluating their teachers, they're using a rubric that's not not designed specifically for dual language. And so that's another piece of this, and kind of feeds into your next question of how could this be a tool outside of practicum too, but that, rubrics are so powerful in terms of naming what we look for. And so having this tool that very comprehensively names what we might look for is useful for teachers and administrators and instructional coaches, et cetera, who they themselves may not have the training in these specific pedagogies. So that's another reason that we were really interested in the idea of a rubric itself, that it is a tool that can cross boundaries. And at least the United States is a very familiar tool that sometimes carries maybe too much weight, but that really can be a powerful resource when wielded for good, I would say.
And we would also we also wanted to say that the rubrics are really intended also as professional development tools, not just as assessment tools. And when used as an assessment tool, they have to be used really, really carefully and thoughtfully. They were never developed to be used in any kind of a punitive way, but to be used in a way that is there to support teachers, to help them to understand the kinds of instructional practices that are going to be helpful for their students, and also to serve as this tool that helps them to grow, that helps them to identify goals that they have for themselves, that helps them to see growth over time, and that serves as a really good tool for providing very specific feedback. And so all of those things really led to the development of those tools.
Yeah, I think this is a very important point, because we know how challenging it is to use rubrics for assessment purposes, because rubrics are interpreted very differently by different teachers, and also even by the same teacher at different points in their, different moments in the week or even in their careers. So that's a very important point, that the rubrics are planned for professional development, for assessment, for learning, rather than summative assessment. Yeah, very important.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And just now you mentioned you developed 3 sets of assessment rubrics. And I think in the study, in this paper, you mainly focus on the pre-service rubrics, right? So how about the one for in-service teachers? And maybe could you also share some findings that maybe how the 2 groups of teachers maybe use the rubrics differently, or maybe, yes, any observations, any interesting observations?
One thing I'll say is that, so in the pre-service rubric, we've got somewhat different levels. Both of the rubrics, or all of the rubrics, I should say, have the top level exactly the same. That top level is called excelling, and it really describes what very strong DLI teachers are able to do in the classroom. And in the in-service rubric for practicing teachers, the other 3 levels, which we called lacking, emerging, and demonstrating, all serve as developmental levels in the trajectory of teacher development. At the pre-service level, it was those levels were somewhat different. We envisioned recognizing, developing, and excelling as developmental levels. And we wouldn't expect, certainly in our pre-service program, for teachers to reach that excelling level. We would see them in between recognizing and developing as very, very new teachers. But we wanted them to see how we would describe excelling, right? What a really talented teacher is able to do in the classroom. But then we also had another category called counter evidence for the pre-service level that was not at all intended as a developmental level, but rather a place where we could call out practices that really could potentially be detrimental to students, because especially with very, very new teachers, pre-service teachers, they can lack so much knowledge and practice that sometimes they they engage in practices in the classroom that are really not very supportive of their students. And so we wanted to call out those practices, but we sort of separate them off. They're with a white background. They're devoid of color like the other levels are. They're separated by a bold black line, but they're really there to sort of say, if you're not thinking about language objectives at all, and you're not helping students to understand that this program is not only about learning content, but also learning language, that's a problem, right? So at any rate, so that's how they somewhat differ in that regard, if you will. I've lost track of the question.
Well, I was just going to add there, during the time of the grant, we actually didn't collect data on working with the rubric with in-service teachers who weren't in the program. Some of the teachers who were in the licensure program were classroom teachers because at the time the state allowed districts to hire teachers before they had their endorsement or their license, as long as they were working towards the license. But we didn't collect data from experienced in-service teachers using the rubric, or I should say we haven't done so yet, right? That would be a great next step to be able to do that comparison.
Yes, that would be great.
Really
Thank you.
interesting. Yes.
There were just limited funds. In fact, we wanted to do a more robust study, and there were just limited funds based on the grant funding that we had. So
that happens. So
yes.
You've mentioned that when you refer to the motivation for carrying out this study on rubrics, you mentioned the specific need in the U.S. context, and something that was needed really. So the question that we have is, to what extent the rubrics that you propose and the study in general can be applied or is transferable to contexts outside the U.S. context, other educational contexts in other parts of the world?
As we were designing the rubric, we really looked broadly at literature across the world, looking at, CLIL contexts compared to dual language in the United States or French immersion in Canada, in order to develop the constructs of the rubric. And we also, Dee mentioned we had this iterative process of designing the rubric, and one of the parts process was doing a construct validity study, getting feedback from teachers, educators, and scholars, and really around the world, especially for the scholars. And we received high levels of construct validity from folks in different contexts. And so that's one way I would say that I think that some aspects of the rubric are certainly applicable. We've had the rubric translated into French by folks who are working in French immersion context in Canada. And so that's evidence to us, I think, that they found it applicable for their context. But I don't know. Dee, do you know if the rubric has been applied in other countries beyond that?
No, I do know that in Ireland, they used the rubric in part, along with some other tools, to develop their own rubric for the Irish immersion context. So TJ O'Callagh and some other colleagues were involved in that project. The last I heard, I was asked to be a consultant and to provide them with some feedback along the way as they were developing the rubric. And the last I heard, they were piloting it with teachers, and I don't know where that stands at this point. But that would be a great study if they were doing research on it to have published in the journal. I'm glad that Cory brought up the fact that we did do this pretty extensive survey of both practitioners and experts or scholars in the field. And in fact, I went back to and looked at the paper, and over 80% of the expert group rated 19 of the 21 substrands as most or very relevant as we were looking at the construct validity of it. So we think that would be helpful. I will also say, and I'm glad Cory brought up the fact that these have been translated into French. Susan Ballinger actually got some grant funding to hire a translator to translate them into French to be able to use them in the Canadian context. And when they were translating the workbook, we haven't talked about the workbook, but a workbook was developed that was largely Cory's work to provide some further explanation about the practices in various components of the rubric, and then to provide some written examples of what this looks like in the classroom. And I do know that when the Canadian group was translating the materials, they actually changed some of the examples to better reflect the French-Canadian context. We were trying really hard to represent the huge diversity of programs that we have in the US. We have many, many, many different languages that are represented, for example, Chinese. And so we wanted to make sure that the workbook would include some examples that would reflect a Chinese context, for example. And that was not relevant to the Canadian context. And so they did make changes pretty substantially to the workbook examples.
Right.
Oh,
That's
great.
interesting. So, yeah, so it seems that it's an ongoing project, and I'm sure you welcome scholars from other contexts to contact you, maybe for collaboration or for further validating or adapting the rubric in their own context. Thank you so much. Thank you to Dee and Cory for sharing your insights, for sharing your interesting and very useful tool to support teachers' professional development in different contexts. And for readers of our journal, if you're interested in the article, in the assessment rubrics, and also in the findings of the study, you can refer to their open access article published in our journal in 2025, volume 13, issue 2. And yes, so thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.